And in conjunction with that, there will be hybrids. These hybrids are going to be in two categories, I believe. Those who are very destructive and scary, and then those that represent the Superman, the replacement of humanity. And there's going to be a bait and switch leading up to the rapture, I personally believe. But the point is that we are being set up by the fact that for the last 50, 60 years, we've had two kinds of alien movies, the bad guys and the good guys. And I believe that's to create a tension in the Hegelian dialectic to produce an end time result, which I don't know we could go into in this program. But the point is that mankind is being set up to look to these so-called aliens, which are really Satan's replacement for mankind, which are modern-day hybrids, just like it was in the days of Noah, so will be the return of the Son of Man. But they're now coming back as the good aliens, and they're going to show us, lead us how to be like them by submitting to that agenda. And 100% of the whole alien agenda is a New Age kind of a philosophy. It's an Antichrist agenda. So anyone that buys into this is under that deception that's referred to in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
Yes, I would definitely agree. There's a new movie out called Splice, SPLICE, in which they have created this Homo noeticus, which is Latin for a new type of a human, and it is clearly a parahuman transgenic. Parahuman means it is part human, and it is a transgenic, a mixture of two different species into one person. But Stephen Hawking, the famous scientist, said, if there are aliens out there, they are not going to be like the positive New Age feeling people that you see on TV. They will be a threat to mankind.
The Hegelian dialectic, can someone explain that?
Well, it's a dialectic where you begin with thesis and then you create a situation either socially, in terms of social engineering and changing from one form of government to another. You start with thesis. Let's say in this country we have, free enterprise and all that, which represents the free market. If you're going to create a change, then you have to bring in antithesis. That would be a radical overthrow of, say, capitalism. Well, that swings over to the far right. Well, then there's a reaction to that, and then the end product is a synthesis, where you have a fascist state where the agenda is realized as part of the Machiavellian school of warfare. So the Hegelian dialectic is thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And I will just say this, that everyone's DID system is structured after the Hegelian dialectic. You have the thesis, that is the original person, then the horrific assault, which actually, with the generation people, comes in at conception, and then, of course, throughout their life. You create an antithesis, you create an alternate identity, and, of course, that can be many identities. And then when the trauma is over, you have a synthesis, you have the creation of a presenter kind of system or personality that carries on an amnesia. So the point is the Hegelian dialectic can be used in terms of social engineering or to create any kind of change, but it's also the same kind of dynamic that defines the internal conflicts of everyone who is DID-SRA.
Now, how many people out there actually get scared of what you're saying? I mean, do you actually have people that are just like, I don't want to hear it anymore?
Go ahead, Preston.
Well, that's what's been frustrating through the years for Doug and I. Christians have often said that they just don't want to hear it, whether it's true or not. And many Christians just oppose it. Only 1% of psychiatrists believe there's a condition called dissociation, even though it is in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, and it is really a recognized psychological condition. What's interesting is Roseanne Barr, the comedian on TV, she was abused as a child, and she openly tells the world that she has dissociative identity disorder. Her ex-husband Tom Arnold said one time, he said, "For those of you who do not believe that DID is real and exists," he says, "you need to live with Roseanne Barr for 24 hours. And then he said he said it in jest, but it was the truth. He said, "She has 100 personalities, and 99 of them hate me."
Yeah, and I think Oprah Winfrey had when that rabbit howls, I forget Trudy Chase, and she's had others on her program where they've actually discussed DID as an artifact of childhood trauma. Not even talking about SRA, just talking about trauma, incest, and that kind of thing. So it's a real phenomenon, and the problem is that the church is very naive. You try to attribute a lot of people's problems to demons, and it's true, it's there. But when you have a history of trauma in a person's life, it's not a matter of just getting rid of the demons. You've got damage there. You've got the psychological phenomenon is based on trauma, and can be defined in terms of the symptomatology of trauma. But you can do all the exorcism, anointing and oil, and discipling you want, unless you treat the disorder, unless you recognize there is a trauma source disorder that's DID. These people are not going to get helped. And I'll never forget Dr. Jerry Mangazzi. We were talking about something one time. I went to all of his conferences in the 90s because he was the one that first really introduced me to satanic ritual abuse and trauma-based mind control in terms of how you begin to recognize and treat this. And Jerry told me personally, he's a brilliant man. He's got his PhD in counselor education and works with DID. He's worked with DID for almost 30 years now. But he said that the majority of the people that come to him are Christians who have gone through all kinds of deliverance ministries, and some of these deliverance ministries have been very sincere. I think they've known the Lord. They've done the best they can. But when they don't get better, and when they try to cast out the altars or that which is really human, then they get worse. But they're afraid to tell their Christian counselors they're getting worse because they take responsibility. They think it's something wrong with them. So in secret, they wouldn't tell the church or the ministers that were trying to help them. They would go to Jerry, Dr. Mangazzi, and tell them what's going on. And he said the majority of those who have come to him are Christians that have come from churches ashamed because they weren't getting better. But here's what Jerry said. At a conference one time in ICBC, a Christian conference in Sioux City, Iowa, and Preston's been there. He's been a presenter there. I presented there years ago. Dr. C. Fred Dickinson was on the panel. He was a chairman of theology for Moody Bible Institute for over 35 years. I know Dr. Dickinson and his wife, Jean. And somebody asked him in the audience of about 700 people about multiplicity, people who are DID and who are demonized. And he could answer the question. He turned to Dr. Jerry Mangazzi. He said, "I'm going to defer your question about SRA, MPD as it was called then, to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Jerry Mangazzi." So Jerry Mangazzi came. He responded. And he said, "Thank you, Dr. Dickinson." He said, I've got a master's degree from Dallas Theological Seminary. I came from Zimbabwe. I understand that demons are real, but I said, when you're dealing with a trauma-related disorder," he says, Christians have a kind of a magical thinking that you can just read the Bible, anoint some with oil, cast out a few demons, and they're going to get better. He says, you have to treat the disorder. And I have adhered to that for years, and I see the results. Do I deal with demons? Absolutely. Because you have to deal with the infestation where there's the demonic, but you also have to treat the disorder. What's your thoughts, Preston?
Yes, that is probably one of the biggest sources of frustration I've had through the years in the Christian community, my father went to school with Dr. Fred Dickinson, so he's been a long-time friend of my family. But Dr. Fred Dickinson, the chairman, like you said, the chairman of theology at Moody Bible Institute, wrote a book on angels and demons, a very scholarly work. So he recognizes demons and what they are, but he also knows the difference that there's dissociative identity disorder. And in the Christian community, Christians tend to have what is called black-white thinking. It's either this way or that way, and once you get married, you know things are not either this way or that way. And a person with a psychological disorder, which dissociative identity disorder is, it needs to be treated accordingly. It needs to be treated as a psychological disorder. When teenagers are rebellious and they have an impulse control disorder, you don't try to cast a rebellious impulse demon out of them because that doesn't work. And that's just as ridiculous as most deliverance ministries trying to deliver people who have dissociative identity disorder from their personalities. It just doesn't work that way. The Bible says man is a spirit, soul, and body. The soul is the personalities that's within the person. And we have three enemies: the world, the flesh, and the devil. But you can't cast out personalities. You can cast out demons, but you cannot cast out personalities. It doesn't work that way. And as Doug said, you've got to treat them through what James chapter 5 says. It says, confess your faults one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The word for healing is the word therapy. We need to use therapy to heal these people with a dissociative condition.
Yeah. And I would also want to include a couple things, and I think it's important for listeners to understand, is that the DID definition of dissociation, or the American Psychiatric Association, it's true as far as it goes. But dissociation also touches the spiritual realm, because when the adversary comes in during trauma, he doesn't just touch the body and the soul. He can actually attach himself to the human spirit. We know that the human spirit can be defiled, according to 2 Corinthians 7:1. Therefore, where it says, "Therefore, beloved, having these promises, let us cleanse ourselves from all defilement of flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of the Lord." In 1 Thessalonians 5:23, may your whole spirit, soul, and body be sanctified. So the spirit can be sanctified. The enemy knows this. So when he assaults a person through the trauma-based mind control or any kind of abuse, he comes in and he invades the entire person. And it's very complex. I'm not going to try to go into it, but there has to be an integration on all three levels. There is that aspect of the human spirit that when it's joined to the Lord, becomes one spirit, 1 Corinthians 6:17. But the enemy will steal what he can. And just to bring this back around where people can understand this, because that could lose a few people there in what I just said. But over 10% of the soldiers that are coming back from the Afghan war and Iraq are suffering from what is called post-traumatic stress disorder. That is, as adults, they've gone through very severe traumatic experiences, and they are affected psychologically. There's a symptomatology complex of PTSD. Now, if you were to take a child and place them into those kinds of violent traumatic situations, and then to repeatedly do that on purpose over a long period of time, and much worse, instead of PTSD, it organizes their identity fragments. And so what is PTSD in an adult, in a child, it's DID, because the identity is so overwhelmed, the identity fragments. And therefore, the PTSD is now defined in terms of a childhood experience